Hello and welcome back to the Open Resourcery. This is Magic 101. I'm here, Devi, and of course, I've got Twisted. And we
Yo,
are talking about the metaphysics of fire today. So, how it's used, what's going on with it. So fire right off the bat is destruction. We know fire has very destructive properties, but it is also creation. It is enlightenment and passion and inspiration and willpower. It is massive shifts and changes throughout. So, fire, it is a force that is to be reckoned with. And of course, we've all heard the play with fire and you're bound to get burned. So, it is one certainly to be careful of.
oh yes, most definitely. You know, generally speaking, right, when we talk about the element of fire, we talk about creation and destruction. And, as we talked about preliminarily, there's a few things that, we'll talk about in terms of myths and, different entities that you can potentially contact if you wish to do so within, practices and spiritual stuff. But I guess one thing to cover is not just initial creation or destruction, but also, recreation and that sort of thing. And, the one myth, the one mythological creature, I should say, that serves as a proper symbol of this is the phoenix from the Greco Roman mythology, where, the entire point of the Phoenix's lifespan, right? Like it goes ahead, it grows up, and then it burns to ashes, but then it rises out of the ashes again in a wondrous, glorious flame and begins his life anew. And it's a continual sort of cycle. So while it does go through birth and death in of itself, it is a continual sort of thing that eventually is everlasting. And you could say, not necessarily just an existential manner of like that is just a continual process for a whole of existence, but you could even go ahead and interrelate it to us humans with the concept of reincarnation and the wheel samsara, whichever sort of phrasing label you want to put towards it. And just the fact that not only in that sort of sense we have our own cycles that we go through every day. I know one of the videos that is going to precede this one in releasing is the cycles in circumambulation video where I talked about these sorts of things quite a bit. And you can say that like with the circadian rhythm that we have like throughout our bodies, like when we go to sleep, and also it regulates like okay, like this is when you're gonna get hungry based on not like necessarily just what's in your stomach, but like when you're used to eating and things of that nature, your metabolism, all that sort of thing, right? That continual sort of cycle that we all happen to go through. But yes, by all means, go ahead and give your 2 cents on, say, the Phoenix or that sort of aspect of the element of fire.
Absolutely. I mean, fire is not only like that starting spark, like we have that the starter inside of a car, right? But it is also the end result of really everything. Um and then the extinguishing of the fire is when it's over. Um but fire definitely leads to cycles of life, of magic, of everything. And, even pulling like into my own practice, which I've spoken about before in the tools and the tools series and candles. Candles are used a lot in my own practice as kind of like a oh gosh, I can't think of the word, representational magic, where
Yes.
I will start the ritual by lighting the candle, and all of the intention and everything is there, and from there, um, I will watch the candle burn down. I don't stop the magic. I don't stop the ritual until the candle is completely gone, and then that extinguishing is the end of that entire ritual or spell work that I am doing. So, absolutely, absolutely, that is that leads to the cycles of life, death, rebirth, all of that.
Oh
Um,
yes, and when it comes to say the elements of fire, right? And like so, we're talking about fire, like particularly in this video, but um, previous, we've discussed water and air, and eventually we shall get to earth, and hopefully, the movement around the house and the door, coming closed and opening and all sort of things isn't too loud, and coming through recording. But aside from all that, right?
you're
When
good.
it comes to the elements of fire in that sort of like hierarchy from at least a Western, model and standpoint, right? It is the highest on the sort of, scale you could say in terms of like representing the divine coming down into the earthly, right?
Hmm.
The physical material realm. And like so from the understanding of at least a modern sense from you know the hermetic order of the golden dawn and their attributions, right? There is fire at the top, there is water, then there's air, then there is earth. Fire at the top is the most masculine, um, then comes water, which is the most feminine. Then comes the air, which is the secondary or lower masculine. And then the earth, the lower feminine, and that sort of thing. Now, one thing that I do wish to bring up, and this actually ties into also mentioning a couple entities that you can utilize or contact when wanting to go ahead and do workings with, say, fire, is that let's start off with the actual like point of interchangeability, right? So I've made this point quite a bit in terms of that scale, right? And that previous grimoires, previous magical works and systems of a Judeo-Christian sort, of an Abrahamic sort, it was actually that fire was the top sort of element. Then came air, then came water, then came earth. The same masculine and feminine sort of affinities remained, but there was interchangeability right there. But when it comes to the elements of fire, right, when it talks to uh, Judeo Christian sort of entities, right? So angels, right? In this case, like, talking about archangels, um, that would be Archangel Michael, who on the Kabbalistic tree of life governs over the sphere of Mercury, which in of itself is more so of air elements and all that sort of thing. And also in terms of interchangeability, right? Like Raphael happens to govern over the sphere of Tippereth, which is the sun, which is more so fire based and such, which I'm sure we'll touch on, the sun a bit more so as this conversation progresses.
Yes.
And that sort of interchangeability and all that sort of thing. Once again, I've discussed it, quite a few times on the channel, and credit goes out to the YouTuber Foolish Fish, who went ahead and elucidated me to that sort of phenomena, um, and has served as the basis of me mentioning it, in those videos. Um, but yes, so in I guess in terms of the sort of um, in terms of the sort of like listing of entities, I guess we're gonna jump into that. Devi, who are some other entities that you have noted as like, all right, in different mythologies, these are the ones you'd want to contact for whatever particular flavor a person may have?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, we've got a lot. Like in Hindu mythology, we've got Agni. Um, we've I am going to probably chop this name because I do not speak Chinese, but Zurong, Zurong, the Chinese fire god.
Okay, can you spell it out for the folks out there just in
Yes,
case?
Zhurong. Um, I know I know the Z's kind of make a sound, but I'm a little
Yes.
lost on pronunciation. Then we have Pele or Madame Pele, of the Hawaiian mythologies, which I'm sure Lona would love to speak on sometime.
Oh
I
yes, yes, particularly yes. He
yes.
loves talking about Pele quite a bit, as
Oh
much
yes.
as I talk about Lono itself.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Absolutely.
yes.
Mesopotamian, we have Gibil. I was trying to find more information on him, but it says yes, he is a fire god, and that's it. I'm just like, oh, fantastic. So more research is needed there, and then one that really intrigued me is the black god in Navajo mythology. That one really like sparked my interest. I'm gonna have to look into that one a lot more. But most of them, uh, they're bringing creative energies to people. They're or even in the case of Zurong, some of his mythos actually follows along with Prometheus, where I know Prometheus is not a fire god, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about him. Pardon me,
Yes.
because he is the one that gave people the gift of fire. Now,
Which actually originally came from Hephaestus, also known as Vulcan, Volcanos, which is where we get the name volcanoes from
mhm.
in terms of phrasing those particular things. But yes, Volcanos, happens to be the god of fire, as well as blacksmithing, and metalwork and all those sorts of things. But
Mhm.
that's where Prometheus got the fire from.
That's where he got the second fire. But so Prometheus is actually seen as the progenitor of people. He is seen as the creator of people. They were the last ones that were created in terms of beings on the planet. Prometheus was so proud of it, and he presented his work to Athena, and she said like, "Yes, this is awesome," and blessed it with it's called defying breath. So how humanity came to be, and then he he really was so proud of his work. He wanted it to be able to stand out. He wanted man to be better and to succeed. And so Athena actually was the one that advised Prometheus to introduce fire to man. And then Prometheus, he went out and waited for Helios's carriage. So Helios is the god of the sun, right? He's also seen as a
Yes.
titan. There is a little bit of like back and forth there, but it is what it is. So he went over to Helios's carriage, lit a torch, and gave it to humanity. Humanity started rapid development, just weapons, tools, being able to actually dominate over their surroundings and nature. Prometheus was so happy about this because he's seeing his creation thrive and loving to see that they are um, able to progress like a parent would be so proud of any child, right? You see your kid come home with 100 and you want to do a happy dance with them.
Oh yes. Yes.
So Zeus, being who he is,
Yes.
decide that people need to honor the gods by making sacrifices. Prometheus wasn't about this. He did not want his creation to be exploited. Now, you personally know my opinion on Zeus.
To put it very generally for
Mm-hmm.
those folks out there, Devi is not necessarily all too fond of a lot of patriarchal figures in different mythologies, primarily Zeus. Not to say
Mm-hmm.
that, hey, look, anything wrong with all of them, but just the persona of Zeus based on the mythology surrounding him, including stuff having to do with, like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and have my way with women, all willy nilly and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
yes,
Zeus is not my favorite. So Zeus being who he is, he was demanding offerings. Prometheus stepped in and interceded, and he did not want his babies to be exploited. So he actually taught the people how to deceive the gods. Um, and in this, there was a bull sacrifice. The product of the sacrifice was actually split into two piles. One was smaller, but it contained all the meat, but it was covered by the animal's skin. The other pile was bigger, but it really only contained bones and entrails. Apparently, these were wrapped in fat, which made like the offering look like super good. And
Yeah.
Prometheus knew that Zeus, he would choose the bigger pile. And he was absolutely correct. And Zeus chose the bigger pile. So, Zeus, throwing a fit because he knew that he'd been tricked, he stole fire from the hands of humanity. He took it away. And then mankind began to regress back into caves, again, tormented by darkness and cold. They couldn't cook their food, they couldn't light their forges to make weapons. Um, and Prometheus, of course, was outraged, like any good Papa Bear would be, right? Any good Papa Bear would be really mad. And so he stole fire and gave it back. So during the night, he went to Hephaestus's forges and he stole fire. This is the fire that we still have. Um, and he gave it back to mankind. And with the reestablishment of fire with man, so that creative spark and that inspiration with man, they were thriving once more. But Zeus got woken up by, oh, things are glowing. There's light. And unfortunately, Prometheus was made to pay for his quote crime unquote. So Prometheus was imprisoned on a rock in the Caucasus to
The
in
Caucasus Mountains, right?
yes,
Yeah, there we go. Proper pronunciation. That's where the term Caucasians comes from, in
yes,
terms of, yes,
to
good old
in
white folks.
oh yes, we're all pasty. It's great. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. To endure internal punishment for going against what Zeus had decided. Um, it wasn't just life imprisonment though. It was really bad. There was a bird that was tasked with eating his liver every day. And he's alive and he's screaming and he's in pain. And he regenerates every night only to be re eaten the next day alive. So apparently, eventually, um, Zeus decided that okay, I'm offering you a way out of this after many probably eons of torture. But he wanted Prometheus to take fire back from mankind. And Prometheus said no. So Prometheus is our martyr in that case. And his sacrifice still goes on.
Well, and you mentioning that there's quite a bit of parallel that has been made a lot of times between Prometheus and the figure of Lucifer in Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic, lore and such. Pretty much saying like, all right, you know what, Lucifer and his rebellion against, Yahweh and Jehovah, pretty much like, going ahead and bringing light in, wanting to bring light and gnosis, to the
Mm-hmm.
people and all that sort of thing, right?
Yes.
Depending on the interpretation, as well as, in the equating of Lucifer to a snake, which is not explicitly stated in the Bible. However, it is gone ahead and these sorts of connections and parallels are made between people who study and all that sort of thing. That he goes ahead and served that role of Prometheus in that particular lore,
Mm-hmm.
and like Lucifer being an archangel of light, supposedly the most radiant, and all that sort of thing amongst the heavens. And being that we went ahead and talked about Archangel Michael himself, that they did conflict in the war of the heavens and such, and obviously Lucifer lost and was cast down into hell in of itself. And yeah, so in going ahead and actually talking about that right there, I think it actually serves as a good segue And to what we can say like is another representation of fire a lot of times is that with the modern interpretation of hell, um, and that the whole destructive process for renewal, you can say, right? So in terms of for a lot of people who have attended like Christian churches, right,
Hmm.
and the whole idea of like if you sin, boy, you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna burn to hell and all that, like in that going ahead and occurring, from my understanding, that is not necessarily a permanent destination per se, for at least when it comes to Christianity in of itself and their understanding. It is there you're repenting for your sins, you're suffering for the sins that you commit on earth, right?
Hmm.
If you don't necessarily go ahead and like seek salvation in Christ in terms of the exoteric understanding of it, but that eventually um, Yahweh, Jehovah, right, will go ahead and in the end of days you'll be judged, right, on the day of judgment. And once again, this is from my understanding, and there's many different brands and different like schisms that have happened with Christianity ever since formation. But generally speaking, right, um, on the day of judgment, you'll go ahead and finally be sorted out into heaven or hell, and this includes those who have previously passed, and all that sort of thing. So you could potentially go to hell and suffer there and have enough repentance for your earthly, sins and life that you led if it was not up to the standard that it should have been in the eyes of Yahweh, Jehovah, and such.
Hmm.
Um, so yes, the whole purpose of hell being for destruction, but also renewal, and all that sort of thing. I will go ahead and denote that when it comes to different representations of hell, it's not always fire and brimstone and that sort of thing. In the Jewish interpretation of an underworld, it's a realm without God, so that of complete darkness that they call Sheol, as well as you can say even in Dante Alighieri's Inferno, where there is quite a bit of the fiery sort of imagery in the writing in of itself, but there's also different levels of hell that are like full of ice and things of that nature as
Hmm.
well. But of course, you know tying this all back and circling back around, when we think of the modern interpretation of hell, it's usually having to do with the fire, you're going to burn.
Oh yes, oh yes. I was raised in Southern Baptist churches, so very used to the fire and brimstone talk.
Oh yes.
Oof. But that interpretation, honestly, I almost think that that is used as a way to create fear of that fear of burning things away and um, rejuvenation and the process that fire is actually good for. It's like even in just the physical. So as much as volcanoes can be a very scary thing, like we know Pompeii, Mount St. Helen, like it's scary to actually watch it because that's literally uh, the earth opening up and exploding fire and sulfur and a bunch of things out. But the after effect is actually extremely beneficial for the cycle of life there because it puts more nutrients into the soil. There are certain seeds that can only take root after being burned in lava or volcanic ash or anything of that nature, which I find
Really, I did not know that.
yes, I will. Let me look up exactly what seed it is, because I completely forgot to write it down.
Time for Jeopardy music. Do do
A
do do
little
do
bit.
do do do.
Okay. Fire activated seeds. Um, Lodge pine. because it's completely
So that,
sealed.
yes?
Yes, it is one that is completely sealed with resin, and that resin is so thick and viscous, and just it solidifies as the seed um, grows. That the only way that that can actually be put back into the cycle, like the life cycle, is through volcanic eruption. Um, and as much as that's just like wild, it also brings brings to mind, for me at least, um you know, even in terms of farming, when you've sapped all the nutrients from the area, one of the best ways to put nutrients back into the soil is either using fertilizer or ash and burning things and getting like nitrogen back into the soil in and of itself, creating that nutritious foundation for the seeds to be able to grow. So, life, even in terms of the earth, and I know this one kind of goes into the metaphysics of earth and renewal in that way, but it must have an ending so that it can be reborn. And that through
Oh,
fire, I think, is one of the most impressive ways that the earth does this naturally.
oh yes, yes, most definitely. And if you want to talk about earthly things going ahead and being impacted by fire, or at least we can go ahead and say the sun, if we think of it as a big fireball in the sky, right? Think
Mm-hmm.
about photosynthesis and that sort of process where plants and trees they get their nutrients particularly from the sun. Now obviously humans do as well, but in terms of that being a particular catalyst for plants to go ahead and participate in the symbiotic sort of relationship that we have with plants. So, for those who are unaware, plants they produce oxygen, and obviously we humans go ahead and we take in oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide. So, in a symbiotic and a partnership manner, in something that is mutually beneficial, the carbon dioxide that we go ahead and exude from us goes back to the plants. They turn that once again into oxygen. It's a continual sort of cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that the plants individually fuel themselves is in fact through the rays of the sun. So the big fireball in the sky once again.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, just as much as they photosynthesize, we got to get our vitamin D from the sun. Like,
Yes.
which I feel really, really bad for those with albinism and they can't get out in the sun, because that's very sad. Because this
I
actually, like, it affects your mood stabilizing hormones just naturally occur within the body. It's one of the reasons why, during the winter when the sun is going away and the fireball in the sky is out, you got seasonal depression that goes on the rise, right?
yes.
So, like, we, we we need that. We need that as much as the plants do.
Oh yes. And I guess we're gonna go ahead and talk about from a entity standpoint, a goddess, that kind of like serves as, a representation of intersection between fire and earth. Then one that you and I have gone ahead and called upon before as a stand-in at one point was Hestia, who is goddess of the
Yes.
hearth once again in the Greco-Roman mythology and
Mm-hmm.
such.
Hestia, oh my gosh, I love Hestia so much. So she is given like the first offering of anything, like from every meal. She is honored and venerated. Technically, she is the oldest of the Olympian gods because she was born first, but she was regurgitated from Cronus's stomach last. So she is at the same time the youngest because of that. Um, but she is given honors. And in terms of, being the goddess of the hearth, she is, God, she's so important. Because if you think about it, the hearth was where food was cooked, the hearth was where the home actually operated. Think of that as like the central pillar of the home in and of itself. A home did not have a soul unless it had a hearth or fire. So she's she is more so that continuous, um almost resonance with the soul of humanity, in my opinion. Um
Yes. And talking about that, right? Like, I can go ahead and draw upon, going into more so of a Hermetic and or Egyptian sphere of things, right? Like one of the seminal texts for me in terms of the foundation, my own like perspective of things, is the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, right?
Mhm.
And within that, right, from my understanding, within like like a human being, right, or a being entity in of itself, you have the soul, which is kind of like the encasement, right?
Yes.
What have you, kind of like an intersection between the higher and the lower. But the higher aspect, that divine fire, resonates within that, and that is the pure essence. You can say from a Gnostic terminology that is the bit of the pleroma, that is gone ahead and encased within, the demiurge's creation of, the soul and the physical world and all that sort of thing in of itself. And also, since we're talking about, the Egyptian sort of like, going into that real aesthetic and realm of things, shout out to Ra, who is, the fire god, the sun, light, warmth, and growth, and all of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
But
Along with that, I'll also go ahead and since we're talking about solar entities, right?
mhm.
One that comes to mind is Amaterasu, who is the Shinto goddess of the sun and all that sort of thing, who, in terms of like their current hierarchy, serves as the the matriarchal figure and the top dog in that sort of sense, currently speaking. Um, and not only getting off the particular solar archetype, you could say,
Mhm.
if we're going to keep within the realm of Shinto, there's Kagusuchi, who is the god of fire particularly, and you could say that he embodies, at least in the mythos, like in terms of the most infamous part of it, more so the destructive aspect of like Kagusuchi is known for killing several of his siblings and such due to the wrath of fire in of itself,
Mhm.
his fiery wrath and all that sort of thing. Which I think serves a good segue to go ahead and talk about the nature of like fire. If not handled properly, whether it's in a actual like real life sort of manner or even spiritually, how it can go ahead and potentially burn you and all that sort of thing. So Debbie, if you have any thoughts on that, please go ahead and take off with it.
Absolutely. So, this is where using the elements in balance is very important. I know for myself, with spells and rituals, I have set off quite a few fire alarms. Ta da! Devi does the same thing. Don't do it. So, so um, I would definitely say fire safety first. But in terms of just like the metaphysical aspect of it, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. It can be overwhelming. It can take you over, in terms of fire, in terms of emotion, in terms of inspiration. Like we've all seen the archetype of the tortured artist, where all of his creations are just like they're taking control of him. His creativity and his inspiration is just driving him to literally be skin and bones, not taking care of himself in any way, shape, or form. But in that way, there that is one of the dangers of really that creative inspiration and drive, really.
Oh yes, yes. Touching back onto like looking at fire in terms of like the destructive lens, right?
Mhm.
We look to another personification of this being in the Norse Germanic pantheon. We have Surtur, who is one of the principal entities that go ahead and scorch the world when it's time for Ragnarok. The end of all things in their mythos and their lore. Actually, today I happen to go ahead and finish playing Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Pretty good game. Goes ahead and is based on uh, you know, the Celtic and the Norse mythologies, but it's primarily about the topic of psychosis and mental health, and that being like trying to make it as much of a representation, you know, as accurate as it can be within the video game medium. But yes, you happen to go ahead and fight against Surtur in the early portion of the game in of itself, and it talks about it within at a certain point in the game of like Surtur, his role within Ragnarok, but also Ragnarok in of itself, and of course there's Thor Ragnarok if you want to look at another fictional representation of Surtur, and all of that.
Hmm.
I
Absolutely.
guess. Oh yes. Now, not necessarily with a destructive context, but in terms of a couple more entities to go ahead and note that are associated with fire and fire elements that come to mind for me is Ogun, who's the god of fire and patron of blacksmiths and iron and warfare metal tools, similar to us mentioning Hephaestus, aka Vulcan, Roman, Greco-Roman god beforehand, talking about the whole Prometheus mythos and such. Um, Oya, who is the goddess of fire, as well as wind, I believe, as well, and fertility, and also Shango, who kind of has like the uh, the double elements of thunder and fire, from my understanding, is considered a storm god. But yeah, those three also came to mind as well. Um, Not only that, but if we're going to talk about fire elementals, generally speaking, I believe they're called salamanders, right, Debbie? Is that correct?
Yes, they are called salamanders. Um, they're seen as like even in Frozen 2, it literally had a representation of this little fire salamander. My kids were obsessed with it. It's so cute. But they are actually like invisible. They are not physical beings as elementals are. But that is the description of them. Um, of course, uh, Paracelsus actually wrote about salamanders, saying they could be found in St. Elmo's fire, as well as small balls of light during weather storms. So there is a phenomenon called lightning balls or ball lightning, um, that he is equating to salamanders, which it's a very weird phenomenon. If you can find a video on that, oh my gosh, it's a hoot to watch.
Oh yes. So real quick, just being the semantics guy over here,
Mhm.
Periclesis or Paracelsus is
I'm
the
sorry,
proper.
Paracelsus. My eyeballs decided that the L needed to go somewhere else. I'm so sorry.
You're all good.
Apparently I have dyslexia today.
It's all good. It's all
Oh gosh. But salamanders very much useful in terms of manifesting courage, willpower, enthusiasm, like we said before, that divine spark, that starting of something, giving it momentum. That very much is part of their assistance for people. Um, but
Oh
yes.
yes. And if you're looking for other fictional representations for salamanders in themselves, a couple more that come to mind is for those who have seen anime of Black Clover. They have like representations of the different elemental spirits and all that sort of thing. There's only one salamander that has gone ahead and showcased in that particular series and such, to represent that. But in terms of, say, another one where there's like plentiful, There is Salamence in Pokemon, which granted there's tons of different fire element Pokemon and such, but Salamence is definitely derived from salamanders, and I think from that particular concept in of itself, granted it's dragon type, but yeah, that's immediately what popped in my mind
Of
and
course,
all that sort of
Pokemon.
thing. Yes, yeah.
Oh gosh.
um, but yeah, I'm trying to think what else is there to mention about like fire and such. Oh yes, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that. Obviously from an astrological and a zodiacal standpoint, right?
Hmm.
Like, there is uh, the signs of Aries, and then Leo, and then Sagittarius, all being, the fire sign and such, action driven, you know, generally speaking, like, expansive growth, all these sorts of general traits that they happen to share, independence, all that sort of thing, having this flame and this light that, they try to broadcast outward, and, all that sort of thing.
Absolutely. And another thing I would like to touch on is reasons like why we use fire inside of the craft in and of itself. So, one of the things I want to touch on is like a releasing ritual. So, super easy. This is something more so psychological, but it's really good and it's cleansing. Fire is cleansing because you are allowing that phoenix to burn into ash and release it to the wind. So you're going to write down whatever thing has been on your mind that you just can't seem to get over, you can't seem to let go of. You're going to write it down in great detail. Your cost for this ritual, for this act, is literally the time and concentration you have on being specific in your wording inside of that piece of paper. And you're going to actually write it down on a piece of paper. And it's nothing that you are able to change. If it's something that you are able to actually act on and create change in and of itself, it probably isn't good for this. But if it's something that you have no power to change and it's been turning over and over in your mind and causing you suffering, it's really a good thing to go ahead and release so that you are releasing yourself from this burden. And so fold it away from you 2 times because you're drawing it out of you, you're drawing it away from you. And then preferably outside so you don't set off the fire alarm. Go ahead, either light a candle. Color really doesn't matter. If you've got a fire pit, go for that one as well. Um, and then set the paper, into the flames. And as it's releasing, just letting that connection to whatever issue that is go. It's very therapeutic in terms of one's own shadow work or um, self self help, but
Yes.
it's very simple, but it is incredibly effective. Of course, like you could either be releasing a person, an entity, or a feeling. Um, Banishing can be done with fire because you're literally like burning connections. That's where we get like cord cutting, right? So we're cutting cords and, creating that tie between the two candles and then watching as the candles burn the tether between the two of them. And that one's also a really good one in terms of fire. Like if you have unwanted advances from somebody, or you just need to cut a toxic connection that is there. But it's fire is so beneficial inside of the craft. I really don't think there's a day where I don't use it, even in like incense, because you have to light the incense and it has to be burning to actually provide the smoke in the area, or candle work or anything like that. for myself, I don't think there is a single day that I do not use fire inside of my craft.
And when playing video games with Devi, she is quite a bit of pyromaniac. Any sort of weapon or any sort of thing that has fire related to it, she's the first to pick that up.
I mean, I got I got Leo and Mars. Like you can't. Yeah.
Yes, I understand. Burn, baby, burn.
Disco
Disco Inferno.
Inferno. Yes.
Yes. And also, another song that comes to mind when it comes to fire is the song "Fire" from the good old album "Crazy World of Arthur Brown." Where it starts off with "I am the god of hellfire, and I bring you." And yes, yes, definitely go ahead and check that out. Search on YouTube, whatever sort of streaming platform, bootleg it, don't matter. Good song.
I'll trust you on that one. All right, but I
Right, well,
think
we've actually gone ahead and you've listened to it before.
have
I've
I?
played it several times. Yes, yes.
Well, this is where my brain is not holding on to things, so we'll have to revisit that later.
Oh, yes, yes. Right after we go ahead and have this talk,
Oh
yes.
yes, okay. But I think that covers all of the points that I had in terms of the metaphysics of fire. Was there anything else that you would like to add?
I think we're good. We're all dandy. I think we covered quite a bit. Yes. So as always, wonderful job, Debbie. Yep, we're pretty good. So yeah, go ahead and send us off.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us at the Open Resourcery, and we hope to see you next time.
Yep. Stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.